Indians historically have had a global influence. Their rich and vast culture is shared among many different regions across the globe. Through centuries of migrating to every corner of the world, many countries have adopted some parts of Indian culture into their own. The diverse cuisine, vibrant traditions, and colourful clothing can all be seen in different parts of the world, even in East Africa. In fact, the Indian subcontinent has long historical ties with this part of Africa that are deeper than you think through migration. But how and why are there so many Indians in East Africa? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Atlas Chronicles for more content like this. We can go as far back as the 1st century to discover Indians' early interactions with East Africa. Ancient sailors on the western coast of India discovered that monsoon winds could carry ships from India to the coast of East Africa in summer and back to India during winter. The monsoon winds were key to early contact, and the discovery created one of the world's oldest long-distance maritime trade networks, linking India, Arabia, and the Swahili coast, which is modern-day Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. Thusly, Indian merchants sailed to the East African coast in search of ivory, gold, and slaves. They bought cotton textiles, beads, and spices in exchange. It didn't take long for these two regions to start adopting each other's culture. For example, African ivory and gold found their way into Indian temples and luxury goods. Indian cotton weave techniques and metal tools were introduced in East Africa. For centuries, these two regions had an active trade route. By the 10th century, Swahili states like Mombasa and Zanzibar had become wealthy trading hubs. Indian merchants played a significant role in this trading system through their seasonal arrival with the monsoon winds. Goods from India were also common in Swahili markets, while East African ivory and gold were common in Indian markets. Fast forward to the early 19th century, Sultan Said of Oman moved his capital from Muscat to Zanzibar. This marked a turning point as Zanzibar became the center of trade for the entire East African coast, connecting Arabia, India, and the African mainland. The Sultan encouraged Indian merchants to settle in Zanzibar because of their commercial expertise and financial networks. These Indian traders were collectively known as Banians and handled a range of trades such as the export of cloves, ivory, and slaves from Africa and the import of cotton cloth, spices, and rice from India. They often acted as financiers and tax collectors for the Omani elite, using their accounting systems and lending money at interest. Indian families settled in Stone Town, Zanzibar's main urban center, creating a distinct community. They built temples, community halls, and trading houses, which became landmarks of Indian cultural presence. By the mid-1800s, Indians dominated Zanzibar's economy, controlling customs, collection, and shopkeeping. Around this time, the British gradually extended their influence over the East African coast through diplomatic treaties with the Omani Sultanate. As the British East Indian Company was already dominant in India by then, Indian clerks, soldiers, and accountants were brought in to support the British trade missions and administration. By the 1870s, Zanzibar had become both an Omani monarchy and a British client state. The British relied heavily on Indian merchants and administrators who had experience operating under colonial rule and accounting systems. From this point, Indian merchants began to establish outposts along the coast of Kenya and further inland, following ivory caravan routes toward Tanzania, Uganda, and the Great Lake region. By the end of the 19th century, British control replaced Omani dominance along most of the coast and formally declared protectorates over Kenya and Uganda, while Zanzibar remained under British advisory control. The British still encouraged further Indian migration to develop trade and administrative services. In the 1890s, when the Uganda Railway project began to connect the country to Mombasa, the groundwork laid by these earlier merchant families made it easier to recruit around 32,000 Indian workers. The conditions were harsh, with over 2,500 Indians dying from disease and accidents. After completion, around 7,000 Indians stayed in East Africa, settling as traders and small business owners. As the Indian population grew, the three-tier system was gradually implemented. This was the way to divide the British colonial society by race. The Europeans were at the top of this hierarchy as they held political power and owned large estates. The Indians were next as they dominated commerce, retail, and small industries. And the Africans were last in the system, as they were largely restricted to agricultural labor and subsistence farming. By the 1920s, Indians controlled most retail and wholesale trade in Kenya and Uganda. They owned ships, transport companies, and banks. They have also built schools, temples, and mosques, preserving their cultural identities. Over time, Indians were tired of being British subjects and demanded equal political rights with Europeans. In Kenya, figures like Alibai Mullah founded the East African Indian National Congress. They pushed for representation in the Legislative Council, but the British consistently favoured Europeans. Laws continued to restrict Indian land ownership and segregated houses in cities like Nairobi and Mombasa. Indians protested through petitions, legal challenges, and the press. By the 1930s, Indian and African leaders began to find common causes against racial discrimination, though tensions were high. After World War II, African movements started to gain momentum. Many Africans viewed Indians as part of the colonial structure, given their economic dominance and perceived closeness to the British. However, some Indians supported African nationalist struggles, advocating for labour rights and independence. The British did eventually start to support Africanization, gradually transferring power and economic opportunity to indigenous Africans. Consequently, Tanzania gained independence in 1961, Uganda in 1962, and Kenya in 1963. Many Indians remained to help run industries, but post-independence policies would soon challenge their position. After these three countries gained their independence, their governments tried to prioritize the indigenous people of their countries, as they were always treated second class compared to the Indians living in the region. For example, under Jomo Kenyatta, the Kenyan government introduced the Africanization program, seeking to place more Africans in civil service and business. Indians were encouraged to take Kenyan citizenship, as many retained their British passport after independence. Those who chose not to were classified as non-citizens and faced restrictions on business ownership and property. Despite this, many Indian Kenyans adapted, reinvesting locally, diversifying their business, and establishing schools and charities. Tanzania nationalized industries and promoted collective farming under Julius Nyerere's policy. This meant that Indian-owned businesses were nationalized and foreign exchange controls restricted trade. Many Indians remained and gradually adjusted to state-controlled systems. Uganda, under Milton Obote, also promoted Africanization. Like in Kenya, however, the approach was a lot more violent when Idi Amin seized power in 1971. In August 1972, Amin accused Indians of sabotaging Uganda's economy and ordered the expulsion of about 80,000 Indians, giving them 90 days to leave. Many lost businesses, homes, and lifelong savings overnight. India, Britain, and Canada took tens of thousands of refugees. Soon after, the Ugandan economy collapsed, proving how deeply Indians had been embedded in trade and industry. In fact, the increasing departure of Indians had significantly affected the economy of all three of these countries. Many local industries collapsed due to a lack of management and expertise. Gradually, African governments began to recognize the importance of Indian entrepreneurship for national economies. By the mid-1980s, structural adjustment programs and globalization pushed East African states to liberalize their economies. This created opportunities for both new Indian investors from India and old diaspora families to return. In Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni invited expelled Indians to reclaim properties and rebuild businesses. Over time, more and more Indians returned to East Africa. Today, Indian Kenyans remain influential in business, politics, and philanthropy. The Indian community in Uganda has re-established itself, although smaller than before 1972. And Indian Tanzanians continue to dominate Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar. And that was the story of how Indian people arrived in East Africa and how they helped shape Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. If you have any other interesting diasporas you would want on this channel, please comment below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to Atlas Chronicles for more content like this.